This is apropos. Worth some $367 billion annually to the region, tourism to the Middle East is taking a hit from the widening conflict, putting at risk its carefully constructed image as a safe and high-end holiday hotspot. Flights at major hubs, including Dubai, the world's busiest international airport, have been largely grounded, stranding hundreds of thousands of passengers in the worst crisis for air travel since the COVID pandemic. With more on the potential impact on tourism in the Gulf states, here's Luke Trigger.
For decades, the Gulf states have been an oasis of calm in a region more often troubled by geopolitical upheaval. That illusion came to an end last weekend.
We were on a boat when all the missiles started firing, and this is when we found out that the Fairmont Hotel had been hit, which was absolutely terrifying, and there was just like missile after missile coming from the sky. We basically were then evacuated by the hotel, and we had to stay in the basement at 2 o'clock in the morning.
As the US and Israel went to war on Iran, nations like the United Arab Emirates and Qatar found themselves the targets of retaliatory strikes that hit not just oil and gas infrastructure, but the very psychological foundations of the idea that it had been somewhere to do business in safety.
With the UAE, you look at this, what is it trying to do? In Dubai, it's trying a diversified economy. It's going away from oil and gas. That's the airport. That is the hotels. In Bahrain, too, Bahrain is a hub regionally with hotels and real estate being part of the economy. And that's what's being struck.
In nearly 45 years, Dubai's population swelled from 1 to 11 million as its leaders left resource extraction to neighbouring Abu Dhabi with over 90% of the UAE's oil reserves. Dubai branched into financial services, real estate and, like nearby Qatar, travel. Its airport is the busiest international transit hub in the entire world, one now at a virtual standstill with tens of thousands stranded in the region.
By blocking that airspace, you ultimately block global connectivity of people, of trade, of economic engagement, and of global stability. When it comes to global travel especially, trust and confidence are the main currencies, and this has broken that.
Bahrain took the mantle of the Middle East's financial capital from Beirut in the 1970s as that city fell into civil war before Dubai outpaced it. As Iran continues attacking its neighbours, only time will yet tell how permanent the damage to the Gulf states' reputation will be.
Well, for more, we're joined now by one of the contributors to that report, Anita Mendiratta, travel, aviation and tourism consultant. Anita, thanks so much for being with us on the programme. As you were saying there in that report, trust and confidence, they're the main currencies when it comes to the situation, particularly for Dubai. Just talk to us a little bit about what longer-term impact all of this might have for the tourism industry in the Middle East.
Indeed, and thank you very much for having me back this evening. I think what's really important about what we're talking about is that we have Dubai and Qatar, for instance, Bahrain, not only the Middle East in terms of destinations, but also critical flying routes. So there are airlines that are flying into the Middle East, but also those that are going through Middle Eastern airspace. The confidence around that has been fundamentally broken. And so this is going to have a longer term impact, not only on the destinations, but also on the aviation sector as a whole. The sad thing is that Dubai really did lead the charge for the region in trying to diversify off of oil. They've been doing it for many years. 25% of Dubai's GDP comes from travel and trade itself. And we've seen other nations around the region follow that model. So Saudi Arabia most recently. For all of them, this is going to be very bruising because ultimately when someone is traveling, whether it's for leisure or business, the ability to feel that you can trust you are safe in a place is fundamentally important. And now, by implication, we have significant reconsideration.
Yeah, because Dubai, its modern identity, really, it's built on being insulated from these kind of conflicts. So authorities there and in the UAE more widely, they've moved quickly to try to contain the damage to confidence. But what exactly can they do to ensure that tourism does continue, that people visiting do feel safe, and also for businesses as well, that it remains a reliable and dependable partner?
Indeed. Dubai is an excellent example internationally, admittedly, of crisis leadership. And this is where it's really important that the airports, the airlines, and the Tourism Development Authority work very closely in the best of times and in situations like this in the worst of times. So they have a very strong ecosystem of response. As soon as the challenges happened in the UAE, the government put out notification to make it very clear that accommodation was priority number one when it came to taking care of travelers. All of the costs would be absorbed. It was about making sure that people were in safe places. When we look at Dubai airports, they were used to having 1,200 flights a day going through the airport, but 250,000 people. And that's gone down to roughly about 80 flights per day, only because it's about airlines being able to utilize safe corridors through that Middle Eastern airspace. And in no way is this the regular schedule of flights. This is repatriation flights. But once again, the leadership at Dubai airports, the CEO, Paul Griffiths, is an outstanding leader when it comes to crisis. He works very well with his teams to really mobilize in a way that supports the airline and the tourism authority in being able to keep people safe and moving onwards as safely and swiftly as they can. But sadly, right now, as we know, the situation in the Gulf is escalating. So speed is something that we cannot take for granted in any way. They're trying to very carefully manage these safe corridors, but we are in a situation where every single hour the situation is changing, and therefore it really is about making sure that safety comes first.
And Anita, I know you yourself were actually caught up in this chaos over the past few days. Hundreds of thousands of people have been stranded right around the world. Just how frustrating, and I presume also anxiety-inducing, is this for air passengers?
Indeed. It is unnerving when you find out that you're somewhere in the world and your flight has been cancelled, even though you're going nowhere near the land of the area that's in the situation of conflict. So in my case, for instance, I was in Delhi on business trying to get back to London on Sunday. I've only just returned this evening because to be able to travel west, I needed to pivot far east. So I immediately jumped on a plane going from Delhi to Bangkok, then went Bangkok to China yesterday and made my way back to London today. So it took a long route. The important thing is that it made my heart break for the tens of thousands and now hundreds of thousands of passengers who don't necessarily have the knowledge of how aviation works and how one can pivot, who don't have the ability or the finances to be able to make quick decisions. So when you're stranded on the ground, the vulnerability, the feeling of being completely isolated is incredibly high. The first and most important thing that people need to do is to make sure that they are registered with their foreign offices so that their foreign governments know exactly who they are, where they are, and that they're in a situation where they need to be able to get home safely. Then when it's safe to do so, the airlines will work with the national governments to be able to provide those repatriation flights. But again, it's very much about safe corridors. And we know that the conflict has expanded from where it was 3 days ago, now spreading into Saudi Arabia, sadly, now spreading into Turkey, which was a significant repatriation hub to be able to allow an alternative for flights that are diverted. So this is a very, very tricky game of calculus to be able to work out how people can move safely. If one is in safe shelter, if they're in safe accommodation, stay put, stay hopeful, and stay ready for when your governments and the airlines turn to you and say, it's time to go home.
Anita, because of the war in Ukraine, we've seen that many, if not all, Western airlines, they've already been avoiding Russian airspace, for example. Is it inevitable now, given this chaos, we don't know when the situation is going to have calmed down, is it inevitable that ticket prices, for example, are going to rise for passengers, not just those intending to fly to the Middle East, but this is likely to have a knock-on effect far wider than that region?
There's a very strong hypothesis that you're 100% correct for a couple of reasons. Firstly, there is no longer the capacity. We've lost a significant amount of capacity by losing airlines like Etihad, Emirates, and Qatar Airways as the throughput through the world. If we think about it, 30%, roughly 30% of travel from west to east, east to west goes through that Middle Eastern corridor. That now has been locked. So other airlines are indeed gaining in terms of being able to bring on the extra passengers. But increasingly as well, the lower capacity means higher cost. We know the price of fuel has gone up. And for airlines that are still wanting to go east, west, west, east, but avoid that Middle Eastern strip, they have to go far north or far south, which is extra fuel, extra time, extra pressure on the airlines. Naturally, this will trickle down to both travelers and also cargo customers, because in all of those aircraft, there's also cargo in the belly of the planes, especially perishables like pharmaceuticals, electronics, and naturally agricultural perishables. So we can anticipate there's going to be an increase. And sadly, I believe this is going to carry us into the summer, as we know the conflict is no close at all to any resolution, and the ripple effects in confidence levels are going to continue through the year.
So in that case, would you be advising people not to travel at all over the coming months, even if they aren't planning trips specifically to the Middle East?
It's a very interesting point that you make, because we've seen coming out of COVID that there's been a dramatic surge in the amount of travel as people have desperately needed to travel. As much as we can Zoom and we can do our Teams meetings, people need that human connection. So they will simply find alternatives, alternative destinations, alternative airline routes, because people still need to get away. So travel will continue, momentum will continue. It's just unfortunate that in the short to medium term, a significant part of the world and the world's hospitality, not only connectivity, is going to be reconsidered as people just don't feel necessarily comfortable traveling in that direction.
And also when it comes to their insurance policies, you know, even if people do have plans for the next few months, because we're talking about active war, civil unrest, that type of thing, they're normally excluded from insurance policies, aren't they? How does that work?
You're absolutely right. And importantly, if they're not excluded from insurance policies, so for instance, tour operators just canceling the policies for tours, so making it impossible to travel, insurance costs have increased. Insurance costs are increasing for passengers, for travelers who are trying to move, and also for cargo, because with the Strait of Hormuz also now blocked off, that's going to increase pressure on air cargo movements so that trade can continue around the world. And without question, that's going to increase. So insurance is increasing, fuel is increasing. The end result is going to be the cost of travel, and the cost of trade is going to increase.
And it's not just passengers that are blocked, of course. You might forget that crew and aircraft are also scattered around the world right now. How long is it going to take to kind of get that backlog cleared?
That's a fundamentally important point that you mentioned. And that's where, when it comes to the airlines and the airports, it's very much about getting aircraft repositioned where it needs to be, along with the crews, and then moving people first and foremost as repatriation flights. It's going to take probably about 7 to 10 days, I would anticipate, but that is simply a hypothesis based on today. Tomorrow morning, it might be a very different and difficult situation. When it then comes to actually getting things moving again, we're probably looking at about 2 weeks, and that's purely a hypothesis for the schedules to be able to start to creep back in. Because again, we know that even though we have a slight degree of air movement coming out of, for instance, Dubai International Airport, that is very, very limited, and it is not scheduled flights. These are repatriation flights and repositioning flights. There's still a huge amount of work that needs to be done for safe corridors across that entire region, which, as I said earlier, is only increasing in terms of military activity, which is not a good sign at all to be able to allow commercial aircraft to take off again.
Anita, thanks so much for being with us on the programme. That's Anita Mendiratta, travel, aviation and tourism consultant.